Good morning. Here today, just taking a moment, looking at some stories, and I'm going to be in Ezekiel chapter 23 in a couple of minutes. If you want to join me and follow along there, Ezekiel, of course, had just a lot of figurative stuff. There's some analogies, and there's some strange things in it. And so sometimes people skip over, but boy, Ezekiel's so full of good stuff. But before I get there, I want to mention, some of you know the story of Ernest Shackleton and the endurance. And he had a reputation as an explorer and very famous, and had done much already in the area of exploration. Well, he wanted to take a group of people and cross the Antarctic. And again, this is 1915. If you just picture this, these are difficult days. And when he the ad he put up, I won't read the ad, but he put an ad up, looking for help, failure likely, return perhaps, no safety, and it's this very morbid job application or advertisement. If we succeed, fame, and and the people were lined up. Now, I think 1915 there were difficult days employment-wise. I don't know, but we'll read a little bit about the time he was on the ice. And so, December 5th, 1915, Ernest Shackleton sailed from South Georgia Island in the South Atlantic. For quite some time, he'd been planning the expedition to cross Antarctica by land. Shackleton and his men would never cross it. They're just short of Antarctica. Their ship Endurance was trapped in the floating pack of ice. For weeks they waited for the ice to break up, but slowly they realized their ship would never sail again. They could hear the rumble of moving ice and the cracking and splintering of the 2-foot thick hull as the ice slowly crushed their only hope of survival. Finally, they abandoned ship to camp on the ice, salvaging the vessel's 3 whaleboats and visiting it from time to time for supplies. And they had this camp set up on the ice, and they just sat there watching the ice slowly just crush this ship that was their way out, in their eyes. For the next 5 months, Shackleton and his 27 crewmen, I understand this, there were no cell phones, there was nobody reporting. Everybody who had a loved one on that boat, they assumed they were dead. 5 months had gone on. And the 27 crewmen lived on a mile-wide ice floe as it slowly drifted northwest with the ice pack. The men shot seals and penguins for food as they battled sub-zero winter gales for survival. Occasionally, a huge man-killing sea leopard would suddenly break through the surface and chase a man in an attempt to get a quick meal. The men's spirits never flagged. They worked together, helped one another survive. After 5 months, the ice floe entered the warmer waters. In the warm waters, it began to break up. Piece by piece, they watched it diminish. Finally, they were forced into the 3 boats that they had. It's just one of those things, you want it to warm up, but realizing you're living on a giant ice cube, so you don't want it to warm up too much. What awkward situations men find themselves in. And they finally took their boats and hauled them across the ice for the long months. They've been carrying them with them as they moved out on the frigid sea. So they get in these lifeboats. They battled wind and waves, hoping they would not sail through Drake Passage to South America and Antarctica. Anyway, for 6 sleepless days, they battled for their lives until they finally landed on the desolate Elephant Island. Although this was the first dry land that they had found in 5 months, they were still stranded. It was barren. It was lifeless. No hope of rescue. Their fate was still in their own hands. They elected to send 1 boat back to South Georgia Island for help. So on April 25th, remember they started December 5th, now April 25th, Shackleton and 5 men began an incredible voyage, 800 miles back to South Georgia for help. They too were battered by an ocean that seemed determined to destroy them. On May 10th, so from April 25th to May 10th, about 15 days, they were 582 days after leaving. So this is an incredible trip. They made landfall They were on the southern uninhabited portion of the island, so there was no help there. So between them, them and rescue was the rugged interior of the island. South Georgia's interior was literally uncharted. The Seaman's chart detailed the terrain only 5 miles in from shore. No one had ever ventured inland further than that. So the only maps they had were just the outside, and they've got this island, and there was a village of sorts on the other side of the island. And so Shackleton and his survivors now had to cross the mountains, the glaciers of the island's tortuous interior with minimal supplies, no winter clothing. Shackleton took 2 men, leaving the others, and started across. Finally, they stumbled into the Stomness whaling station 17 months after having left it. Shackleton then left on 3 separate attempts to rescue his crew, but they were stopped by fierce gales. On the 4th attempt, they succeeded and rescued the crew on August 30th, 1916. So from December 5th to August 30th, months and months and months had passed. Not one man died, and they just continued and did what needed to be done. There's something in some people like Shackleton that just said, we're going to make this happen. And yes, there's opposition. Yes, there's difficulty, but we're not going to quit. No point in quitting. And there's a lot more to that story. But just want to encourage you, let's press on for God. Let's be what we're supposed to be, do what we're supposed to do. And the thing that we have, I don't know if Shackleton was a Christian. I've never read anything about his faith. But for you and for me, we have Christ, and we have the assurance of his presence. We have the assurance that he'll never leave or forsake us. We have his book to guide us. I love the one Psalm David said, even when the iniquity of my heels overtakes me, even when I'm in trouble because I was stupid and sinful, God's still going to carry me through. And it might be a rougher journey, but God's not going to abandon his people. I want you to notice in Ezekiel 23, down at verse 35, the Bible says this, therefore thus saith the Lord, because thou hast forgotten me and cast me behind thy back, therefore bear thou also thy lewdness and thy whoredoms. He said, they've acted like an unfaithful wife. You've chased after all the things of the world, and you've ignored me. You've put me behind your back. You've put me where you don't see me or think about me. And as we look at this passage, this follows about 30 verses of God saying how shameful and godless they'd been living. And God is pronouncing judgment on them. And as I look at this, in chapter 22 and 23, God basically says over and over, look what I did for you. Look how good I've been to you. Look how I've helped you. Look how I've preserved you. And then we come to these passages, and they just ignore God, and they just do their own thing, and they ignore his word, they ignore his commandments, they ignore his presence. They don't take time to seek God, talk to God, pray to God, and God says, you know what? I'm just going to let you go. I'm just going to let you go the way you want to go. And it's a very down time. The Israelite people are in a big mess. As I read this the other day, I thought about America and how God did some things in America he's never done that I know of in any other country. He prospered the people from the very beginning. It was not long after the establishment of the colonies that we were a world power militarily. We defeated Great Britain, which was supposed to be the greatest military force, naval force for sure in the world. We became an economic giant. America became quickly, their educational institutions were preeminent, and they all had a respect for the Bible in those days. And we were industrious, inventions and creativity. Literally everything that these people started flourished. And it was just, and obviously there was men from around the world came here and there were plenty of sinners here. But then the Constitution's written. Of course, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and a nation was officially formed. But long before 1776, there was great blessings on our country, and God had done so much. Said that at one point there was a Bible-believing preacher for every 1,000 people in the colonies. And so there were churches everywhere. If you go to the South right now, many of those churches still exist, and you drive down the road and you think, man, there's churches everywhere. I remember I was at Brother Jeff Hugett's conference a while back, and I was driving by myself. I just did, it might even been a graduation I went to. I think that's what it was, some of our young people graduating. And so I just had a room, and it was just a night, and so I was by myself. But from my room to the church where the graduation was taking place, I think I counted 7 gospel preaching churches, 5 of them Baptist churches, and just right down the road. And they're everywhere. Well, America, it is said, one Bible-believing preacher for every 1,000 citizens. Our town is about 35,000 or something like that. We're a small town still. It's only 1,000 when we started. But I couldn't even imagine 35 Bible-believing preachers in churches in this tiny little community. And, of course, we got mega churches around us. There's several that are running 2,000 or more, I guess. But America was blessed spiritually. We were blessed with, little by little, they got the things squared away, with religious liberty. It took a while. There was a lot of persecution of the Baptists, the Quakers, and the Independents that didn't want to be a part of the Protestant churches. And there were obviously some difficult things to conquer, but everything that we had here prospered, and we're so blessed. And then look at where we are today. People are the media and the political leaders are doing their very best to throw God completely out, and to throw every principle of His Word completely out. I mean, to throw out anything about anything. And as I was reading this the other day, I just grieved my heart. I just wanted to tell God I'm sorry, and I did. I took a lengthy amount of time just apologizing to God. I was sorry for how America had treated Him. Told Him I was sorry for how we'd treated the Bible. One time, the book that was most preeminent in the homes of Americans, and now most people don't know anything about it. I told God I was sorry for how we'd ignored the church, and how we'll put 50 to 80,000 people in a stadium in any kind of weather imaginable for a ball game, but the churches are neglected, and let the church be a little too cool in the winter or too hot in the summer, and boy, people aren't gonna put up with that. And I did. I just went. I had to say I'm sorry to God for how we've neglected His house. I had to tell God I'm sorry for how we've passed laws against the Bible and against the church. I had to tell God I'm sorry for how we passed laws that elevate sin and shame and oppressed righteousness. And how, everything that's there in Ezekiel and more, we've done in America. We've got people all over America. They have lifted up meditation and Eastern mysticism, and of course they'll call it yoga and other meditation type things. That stuff all came out of a godless Eastern culture. I had to tell God I'm sorry for how America's Christians love entertainment more than they love church and Bible and righteousness. They've allowed entertainment to bring smut and filth into their children's hearts and heads. And we've allowed, I had to say I'm sorry for the mess that we've let our schools become in America. Schools that promote every kind of perverse lifestyle, and schools that don't allow a Bible to be taught. And people can argue about whatever they want, but when our public school system started, the Bible was in it all the way up to the 1960s. The Bible was in our schools. I had to say I'm sorry for how America's thrown out words like holiness, discretion, purity, modesty, virtue. Not long ago, somebody we know, we were in the conversation of sorts and kind of listening, but we were a part of this group, and someone mentioned a virtuous woman, and a preacher said, "Who even uses that term anymore?" And I thought, when I heard that, I thought, God uses that term, and that's enough for me. I don't care if the world uses it. We've got preachers who are trying to take the Bible and make it palatable to a society that killed his son and hates his book and hates his morals and hates his righteousness. I had to say I'm sorry to God for the millions of babies that have been murdered and for the endless rivers of innocent blood that's been shed under the guise of freedom of choice. You don't have choice. You don't have freedom of choice to murder people. You just don't. And nobody does. And God, I guarantee you, God doesn't ignore it. If you want to go back to chapter 22, and chapter 22, verse 12, he says, "In thee have they taken gifts to shed blood. Thou hast taken usury and increase. Thou hast greedily gained of thy neighbors by extortion, and hast forgotten me, saith the Lord God." They've taken gifts to shed blood. Isn't that what a doctor does? He gets paid to murder. He's taking gifts to shed blood. God sees this stuff. I had to say I'm sorry to God for the pornography and the endless streams of polluted conversation that flows through our hearts and minds and our lips, things that are seen and things that are said that are just corrupt beyond words. I sat reading and thinking about how it grieved me that the Bible in our homes across America lies unread, while TVs are often in every room of the house. And how sad it is that children 2 and 3 and 4 years old can handle electronic devices and screens, but they've never heard a word of the Bible and could not read a word of the Bible. Parents putting screens, all kinds of electronics into the hands of their children and not taking them to Sunday school. And I just want to take a moment, kind of a negative moment here, but there needs to be some negative in a world as messed up as ours is. Would you just join me in bowing your head and telling God you're sorry for how our country responded to the things he's done for us? God has given us so much. And I would encourage you, take a moment, shut this off, and just take a moment and apologize. And let God know that there's one person who loves his book and loves his house and loves his morals, and that we want him, that we don't want him behind our back. We want him right here in front of us, and that we want him. And I know you that watch this, you're not those that are throwing God out, but they're the great people of the Bible. They apologize for the sins of their nation, from Nehemiah and to others. And I think, look, the world's not going to apologize for their vulgar and lewd living. It's we, the people of God. It is fallen on us to seek mercy from God, to confess the sins of our nation, and to ask for mercy, that he might preserve our country and our freedom. And I don't want to preserve our country and have it keep going into the sewer. If he's going to preserve our country, I want him to turn it back toward right. And I want to see a turning, a moving of God among us. And would you take a moment today and just ask God to bless us and confess the sins that God puts on your heart of our nation? Just the most indiscreet, shameful. We've mocked the home. We've mocked dad and mom. We've mocked the family unit. Our culture has ridiculed morals and decency and elevated a lifestyle of adultery and whoremongering, and we've lifted up liquor and made it something spectacular, and all the wrong, and somebody needs to bow their head and say, God, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for how my nation has treated you and your morals in your book and your house. And then to seek his mercy and his forgiveness, because we have a merciful God. Would you join me in just praying for this poor broken nation and for our churches, that our churches would turn to holiness and our churches would turn to God and the Bible, loving it and loving the God who so loved us.